All right. If you wonder why I keep looking over here, that's where I have my script. I was literally just watching a camping anime. I mean, anything at this point, right? Just say a word, just say a noun, and there's either been an anime about it or there will be within like 2 to 3 years. That's just where we're at. I've tried to write this thing quite a few times at this point. This video is basically a product review, but like an elaborate, high concept product review that's really all for my own benefit, if I'm being honest. Or maybe we could call it like a highly personal retrospective. Instead of talking exclusively about the impact of the Nintendo Switch on the world at large, I want to talk about the impact that it's had on me. Because I love my Nintendo Switch. Just had to get that off my chest. And part of that is based on what it offers to me as a product. I like products. I've made multiple videos specifically about buying products. And as a product, the Switch is good. I mean, it's all right. It was a really neat idea back in 2017. But a lot of my love for this product has to do with what it offered to me and how it basically served as a gateway to the medium. The Switch definitely wasn't the only possible way for me to get back into video games. But without the Switch, I think it would have taken a lot longer, and that process would have looked very different. I'll get into this later, but one of Nintendo's most important assets is the space that it's carved out for itself within the wide world of gaming. Most of the time, that space is welcoming, positive, and uniquely creative. Bottom line, the Switch has had an important impact on my life, and I want to talk about it for a while. And just so you know, this discussion is going to go way beyond the Switch itself, because it's really about how the Switch introduced me, or reintroduced me, to the world of video games. And being in that world right now comes with a lot of baggage. This video is something I've been wanting to do for a while now. If it sounds interesting to you, feel free to stick around. I'm happy to have you here. So before we really get rolling, do you want to go ahead and guess what the system seller was for me, like the game that tipped me over the edge to actually buy a Switch? Because keep in mind, I only bought the thing in 2018, so I definitely wasn't one of the people like waiting outside the store for the midnight release. In fact, I was only vaguely aware of the Switch's existence back then. I just heard that there was a new Nintendo console, and that was okay by me. I mean, I was no stranger to Nintendo. I was gifted a Game Boy Color when I was about like 7 years old, and basically the only like living room console we had growing up was a GameCube. I even had some experience with the Wii U later on, since a roommate of mine brought his Wii U to our shared house during college. I didn't play that many games on it, mostly just Mario Kart 8, and there you go. That was the game. Like tens of millions of other people, I bought a Switch so that I could play Mario Kart. I don't think I'm winning any hardcore gamer points for that one. So it was fall of 2018. I had just started working freelance. I was working from home. I got a cat, and I suddenly thought to myself, well, hey, I have slightly more money than I need to pay my bills this month. I should just go out and buy something expensive. Just in the back of my mind, I knew that I wanted to play Mario Kart. I think that's just sort of a primordial thing a lot of us have inside of us. We just want to play Mario Kart. That's certainly true for me, and that was it. It definitely wasn't like the most complex motivation for getting a console, but I had no idea just how much use I was going to get from this thing over the next few years. And at this point, we may as well talk about the product itself for just a minute. The design language of the Switch is simple but pleasant. Very Nintendo in that way. At heart, the Switch is really just a tablet, and not an especially attractive tablet either. But you don't see it as one. Even in promotional materials, you rarely see the thing without the Joy-Cons or without the dock. And that's for very good reason. The tablet portion is not impressive, not at the surface level anyway. But instead, we see it as the Switch. We see it as a Nintendo handheld, and Nintendo handhelds are just like puppies. They just want to play. They're dedicated to unimportant nonsense. Obviously, this is a drastically different tone compared to the design language and branding of the Xbox and the PlayStation. These machines, for generations now, have focused on looking serious and cool within their own time. Futuristic, powerful, almost intimidating in a way, kind of like those cars with the angry eyes made for insecure people. Meanwhile, the Switch is designed around its core feature. We could even call it a gimmick. It switches between handheld and TV play. Everything about it bows to that gimmick. The form factor, the internals, the OS. The build quality here is not great. The original screen kind of sucks, and so does the battery life on version 1. And of course, Joy-Con drift has been an embarrassment for a company that has a history of building pretty durable hardware. And it obviously doesn't measure up to the competition in terms of performance. In a sense, it's not really a direct competitor of the other big consoles. Instead, it's a blue ocean product that has succeeded because of its unique features and because of its software. Before talking about the games, I need to give a sense for where I was with gaming back in 2018. I already mentioned playing some stuff as a kid on those old Nintendo systems, but it was never really that many different games at once. This was a long time before game subscription services and online storefronts, of course. So your physical collection was everything. So I just played the games that I had. For the Game Boy, that meant Pokemon Red and Pokemon Silver. For the GameCube, that meant Double Dash, NFS Hot Pursuit 2, Animal Crossing, NBA Street Volume 2, Godzilla, Destroy All Monsters. Remember that one? So there were a good few on the GameCube, but we actually had a decent collection there. And over on the PC, I played like the humongous entertainment games and also just whatever stuff I could find on the old DOS like shareware compilations that my dad had stored away. But from middle school all the way through college, I just wasn't that interested in video games. It just wasn't something I got into. I really liked books, I liked movies, I liked music, and that was kind of it. I mean, I was a teenager. I had a few other things going on, lots of angst and like school clubs and such. And the idea of keeping up with video games just seemed like a lot. And that sense of intimidation can deter people from joining all kinds of communities. I just didn't feel motivated to catch up, and video games weren't doing a lot to draw me in either. But in college, everything turned around because basically everybody played games in some form. So lots of kids, brought their consoles along to school, their PC gaming rigs, and this is also back when mobile gaming was actually pretty good. So along the way here, I got introduced to some real classics just through osmosis, really. And I even set up my own Steam account, which was very exciting back then. And in fact, one of the only games that my little netbook laptop could run was Terraria. And that was enough. I put in hundreds of hours on that one. But even then, I didn't really get into gaming. I didn't buy a console or build a capable PC, and I definitely wasn't reading reviews or gaming news or anything like that. It wasn't until 2018, not until I randomly felt like playing some Mario Kart, that I really took the dive. And even then, I didn't feel like I was committing to anything. I just bought a few games. I bought Mario Kart, I bought Breath of the Wild, and a little bit later on, Mario Odyssey, because I had heard that those were the good games for the Switch, and I kind of figured that I would be done after that. So I played them for a while. I really loved Odyssey. I definitely loved Mario Kart. I hated Zelda, actually. I got to the first boss in that game, and I just said, no, I don't really want to do this. And I didn't come back to it for years. I mean, don't worry, I like it now. I understand its significance, but it definitely took some time. But I also started to notice that gaming as a whole had changed just a little bit since the GameCube days. For one thing, a physical collection was not the norm anymore. Now you could just download stuff like you could on PC. Very interesting. And what's this? A bunch of cheap games with great reviews. In just a few months, I was introduced to the impressive slew of indie games, and a few of them quickly became my go-tos. So there were two indies that I started playing on my Switch a lot. They basically took up all of my Switch playing time for probably the better part of a year. Dead Cells and Downwell. These are some games right here. Have you played these ones? These are some of the good video. Also, since they were both roguelikes, they very much appealed to my just cheapskate sensibilities. I could have plenty of fun with these for many hours, and they didn't cost anywhere near $60. So, as a result, I was excited to buy more digital games, and I ended up buying some real stinkers along the way too. So, okay, I thought, it's not all quality stuff on offer. There's good stuff out there, but I don't know where to find it. And that is what led me to games media. I started watching a huge number of gaming channels here on YouTube, even if the videos didn't have anything to do with the Switch or the games that I wanted to play. And I've stuck with pretty much all of those channels ever since. And on that topic, there's just so much energy and attention fixed on the game industry right now, which means that there's a lot to talk about, and apparently lots of room for different perspectives. The market is currently sustaining so many different channels and websites that focus on this stuff. So I started buying a lot more games, almost all of them digital games. I maybe only bought like 3 or 4 physical games a year, and almost never at full price. And it was exciting, and I could generally rely pretty well on those gaming channels to bring my attention to plenty of smaller games that I might have missed, which on the whole is probably one of the best things that YouTube gaming that the YouTube gaming community can do, is to find and share those hidden gems. Importantly, the Switch became an excellent platform through which to explore older games. Since it received so many ports over the years, the Switch became a hub for retro or like retro adjacent gaming. So it really let me catch up on lots of stuff that I had previously missed out on. Gradually, I started looking for more games to play on PC too, and then I got into GameCube emulation. In other words, a year or two after getting the Switch, I had expanded my gaming experience quite a bit. The Switch was still at the center of everything, primarily because I just like playing games on the couch, but it wasn't the only platform for me anymore. I had a bunch of other options, and I appreciated the unique benefits that each one offered. But on top of following along with the new releases and reviews, those YouTube channels I like to watch also introduced me to the behind the scenes stuff. I learned more about like the big platform holders, the big development studios, the big game designers, and major franchises. And I started to understand the history of gaming a bit more, especially in terms of the famous games that pretty much everyone considers to be classics. I didn't know all of that stuff before. I didn't know which consoles had sold best, or like why Sega dropped out of the market, or why people hated BioShock Infinite. There was a lot to take in, and I was definitely interested enough to delve a little bit deeper. In hindsight, this was a very interesting time to join the broader gaming community. There is just so much money in gaming today, and obviously the associated attention and investment has both major benefits and major drawbacks. In a lot of ways, it's a gold rush right now, and has been for quite a few years, and some people are willing to do some really awful things to try to make as much cash from players as they can. Digital game storefronts attract lots of shovelware. In other words, terrible games that often aim to trick buyers into a purchase. And on the AAA development side, studios and publishers have created some pretty disgusting monetization tactics over the last 15 years or so. And they have also effectively normalized those tactics, which is really crucial. So back in, 2019, 2020, I guess, I started learning about crunch culture and workplace abuse. And since that time, there have been many more exposés concerning the negative treatment of employees at game studios, both big and small. I learned that caring about video games also means that you have to care about this stuff and about the people who make them, at least at a basic level. There's been consistent mistreatment of both developers and players, and that might be improving in certain ways, but if so, it's happening very gradually. But caring about games also means recognizing the positive, and there's some real strengths to the contemporary video game industry. Now, do they outweigh all of the bad stuff? Not necessarily. I would even just say no, but they are definitely still important. First up, there's the sheer amount of work being created and released. Because there's so much money in games, and because playing games is so generally popular, there's a lot to play. And you'll often see like game journalists talking about how there's just too much to cover nowadays. And a lot of the new work tends to be great. Definitely not all of it, but every single year delivers a large number of well-reviewed games. And there's always a chance that like a small indie game will get famous sometime after its release here. I mean, that's definitely what happened with Among Us. For the sake of perspective, what other media community has it this good? For example, I'm pretty familiar with like movie criticism on YouTube. I think a lot of us are. There are many channels covering movies, and one of the most common criticisms I hear of like major movie studios and Hollywood in general is that they don't seem interested in original ideas. They just want to make their remakes and their reboots forever. And when a creative original movie gets decent distribution and marketing, these same critics talk about how exciting that is. They feel so grateful to have just one movie in 100 that really catches their attention. Film distribution and marketing is highly competitive, and relatively few movies released in any given year break through into the public consciousness. The film buffs will know about the more obscure movies and like international releases, but most people never hear about these smaller scale movies, which inherently have a better chance of delivering original storytelling than work from major studios. Compared to that, the gaming community is so much more healthy. I know we don't tend to use that word in relation to gaming anything, but still. Not only are tons of games being released by independent devs, but there are thousands and thousands of players and content creators who are actively looking to find and promote some of the unique games they come across. In movies, the amount of attention that a release gets is basically in direct proportion to how much marketing money was spent. But in games, that relationship is much more unpredictable. Most importantly, it's possible for a great game with basically zero marketing budget to get marketed like crazy if it gets the attention of the right people. And I feel like that possibility, that potential support for original work, feeds back into the development side. All the time, I'll see games released that are extremely bold in one way or more. And this tells me that there's a clear desire among a surprisingly large number of game devs to try to push the medium forward by doing new things. And I'm sure that similar desires exist among like young filmmakers and other kinds of artists. But on all of those other mediums, I think it's much, much harder to get weird work noticed, let alone actively promoted. As an example, there are just more YouTube channels looking to promote hidden gem video games than there are channels trying to tell you about like weirdo books that you should check out. And by the way, the gaming channels have much larger audiences too. So more people are being told about obscure games than they are about obscure books or movies. The numbers are just skewed at the moment. Is this making sense? I'm saying that so many people are interested in games that it fuels an entire mini industry of unofficial video game promotion. And I just don't see that happening in other media categories. Definitely not at this scale. I appreciate just how many games are given their moment of attention, and regardless of genre or total units sold, lots of these games end up developing their own little fandoms for the long term. 10 years ago, that's what happened with a game called Terraria. Not a big marketing budget, but grassroots promotion was fueled by the game's merits. People just liked it, so word spread. Much more recently, we had the meteoric launch of a game called Pizza Tower. The artwork alone has resonated with so many people, and regardless of how much money was behind this thing initially, it is the game on its own that has earned all of this extra attention. Media outlets and YouTube channels happily just talk about the game because they knew that people were interested in hearing about it. Now, this could all change in the near future, making video game marketing more and more about just how much money you have. But for the moment, it's really not a terrible system. And those negative aspects of the industry I mentioned earlier they could change too. Things could improve in many different ways. But for now, it's really important to pay attention to those aspects and take them into account when deciding which games to buy and who you want to support with your money. Learning about the behind-the-scenes elements of video game development and the gaming community were an important part of my reintroduction to video games, and learning all this definitely altered my relationship with games. The relationship hasn't exactly gone south, but we could definitely say that it's more mature. Not like that. And now, it's been a long time since I bought my Switch. It doesn't feel like a long time, but it has been a long time. On a personal level, I would consider these like my post-Switch years. I definitely still play the Switch sometimes, and there are weeks when all I play is the Switch. I still love it a lot, but it has definitely lost its spot as my daily. I'm just not obsessed with the Switch anymore. And that's mostly a natural result of just any aging console. The Switch is pretty old now. We all know this. Products lose their luster, and that even goes for the products that end up turning into classics. But I think there's more behind my loss of interest. I think that Nintendo did some really exciting things with the Switch, but they did those things back in 2017. I still love handheld gaming, but now I have quite a few different devices specifically for that. And if there's anything that I want to play not in handheld, then I'll just buy it for another platform. I definitely still love Nintendo's first-party games, but now I also love games from plenty of other big studios. My video game playing habits are more expansive now, and at the risk of sounding corny, I would even say that games are kind of important to me, not only as a form of entertainment and comfort media, but also as an art form. In fact, it feels strange to look back just a few years and think about how I wasn't paying attention. It's almost as strange as imagining just not being interested in movies or music, like just ignoring that stuff. For a long time, I was casually dismissing an entire medium. And this all goes back to the product itself. And for me, it's one of those products that takes on special meaning beyond its immediate appearance and physical properties. Most times, we don't get to choose which products or which objects take on that special meaning. And I definitely did not expect that the Switch would become one of those. I did not expect it to open the door to a hobby that I thought I'd left behind. And I'm so glad it did. And despite my affection for the Switch, I also have to accept that its time is coming to a close. The biggest reminder of that is my personal Switch. I mean, it's held up pretty well. No cracks on the screen, anything like that. Like, the body is intact, but this thing is definitely well used, we could say. The Switch ecosystem is also showing its age in other ways. There's the UI design, of course, which is pretty basic and doesn't feel very useful when it comes to organizing games. I know it includes like custom folders now, but the default view of all your games is still this giant wall of icons. And when you have a Switch library as big as mine, it's really not that easy to locate a specific title. There's also the Switch eShop, which is a mess. I did a whole stream about this topic, or I tried to anyway. The internet wasn't really cooperating. But basically, quality control for the games submitted to the eShop seems to be non-existent. And yes, the quality of a game is subjective to a certain point, but there needs to be a line drawn somewhere, especially when it comes to games that might be committing like copyright infringement or providing deceptive descriptions or screenshots to buyers. It's a fading system, and I'm sure that we'll be seeing many more Switch retrospectives in the years to come. It will be discontinued in time, and used Switches will get slightly harder to find, and slowly it will become a retro system. Kids who grew up with the Switch will make nostalgia posts about going back to visit some of their favorite old games, and they'll tell stories about playing two-player Mario Kart with the little sideways Joy-Cons, which feels awful, by the way. It's not a good way to do it. Maybe a small child, I don't know, an infant. I think their fingers could fit those just fine. Whether you were into the Switch or not, it had a massive impact on the video game landscape of the late 2010s, and for me, it kind of opened up a whole new world. That new world definitely isn't all rainbows and smiley flowers. There are plenty of problems, but there's also a ton to love about it. Without the Switch, I just probably wouldn't be involved. So let's say a fond farewell to the Switch 1 and all that it gave to us. And then let's take that farewell back, because we still need to play that new Zelda. Haven't pre-ordered yet, but I will. Will it be good? I don't know. I don't know about that. Probably be pretty good, right? That's the end of the video. If you want to talk more about the Zelda sequel, we can do that some other time. Maybe in a stream. I don't know. You tell me what we're doing next. Thank you so much for making it to the end. That's all for now. Thanks for stopping by.